Okay, welcome back to the second half of the session 8. And we have our timing a little bit changed. So what I think we'll start doing right away is to introduce Marcelo Hoffman, who will describe some of the activities associated with doing intelligence collections, because he's been working in business intelligence for 5 or 6 years now. So he also has been very active in helping us run the Colloquium. So anyway, here's Marcelo Hoffman.
Thank you. Okay, what I will say today is something based on our experience working on this, actually for a few more years than Doug remembers. I've been at this for about 12 years, but time goes fast. And what I'll take is the example of the business. The microphone is right here. Okay, I'll try again. Any better? Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll start over. Basically, what I'll talk about is the Business Intelligence Center activities. And this is a group that's been doing multi-client research and consulting for some 40 plus years. And I'll use this as an example of what Doug calls dynamic knowledge repository and some of the issues that come about from this. So what we have there, wow, strange graphics. Anyway, we have what we call 7 multi-client programs there. And you can check them out if you look on the web under future.sri.com. Think of them as 7 syndicated research activities. And the whole point is to organize these activities around customers in ways that they particularly find useful. We have some 65 or 70 people working on these activities. And that also is important because we're distributed, our clients are distributed, and this affects the way we do our business and how we connect with our clients. So we have people in Menlo Park, Princeton, Tokyo, London. And then around these different activities like intelligent transportation systems, psychographics, consumer financial decisions, learning on demand, media futures, one that you can't see unfortunately there, business intelligence program, and Explorer. And I'll limit most of my comments about the Explorer program, which is about technology monitoring, and is perhaps the closest to what Doug looks at in terms of intelligence collection, dissemination, that sort of thing. We have found that there's some classic design problems with this. Given a limited set of resources, you have the dilemma. Do you go deeper or do you go wider in breadth in terms of what you cover for the limited resources, funding, people, whatever resources you're dealing with? Then how do you do this? What do you collect, how, for whom? And I'll get more specific. These are not rhetorical questions. They're very specific and rather problematic. How do you analyze what you get? And for whom? Again, the who are the people is extremely important. And then how do you disseminate? This is also a major issue. And I'll use one example, again, under the Explorer program as a case. In general, the answer to these kinds of issues, we do what's actionable for our clients and in ways that make sense to them. And that's highly variable, but we have to do it because there's no other measure. Okay, this is a classic example of one of the graphics we use in one of these multi-client programs. It's how do we disseminate information about, in this case, commercialization of internet commerce itself. And we tend to use lots of graphics, which unfortunately don't show up here after many conversions of Mac to Windows to Mac and so on. But if you were to see it, you would see that the graphics define something about synergistic technologies. There's a graphic on the left upper hand that is a graphic that shows how far along are different parameters when it comes to commercial development. Things like the resources are higher or lower than average, factors required for the technology, and so on. So we try to summarize things as much as we can in a graphical form. And this is important because we have clients all over the world, and they tend not to have much time to spend analyzing lots and lots of text. So this is something very important that I'll bring back if we were thinking of a dynamic knowledge repository in the sense of Doug's, in the sense that Doug says. We have to start thinking, what kind of dissemination would we want? How do we want to present things, represent them, analyze them, and so on? Okay. So we emphasizing summarization for executives, visualization, and particularly for non-English speakers. Okay, the purpose. Typically our clients are concerned about growth, new business, and this is fairly generic. Again, if you could see this better, you would see on the left-hand side all kinds of inputs to a company. Company X is the white box there, and then on the right is where would the natural growth be for this particular company. You know, if nothing is done, if they don't get additional inputs, they will still have some sort of growth or lack thereof. And then the question is, what do we provide? And I think this would be pretty much generic for any outside provision of information and knowledge to expand their capabilities. We sell what amounts to a balance of understanding between demand, technology, and competition. Okay, and then the question then is, how do you analyze this combination in ways that make sense? On the right-hand side, you would see something about commercial development parameters, basically the parameters that the company, the clients want to see that help them make the better decisions. Now, when you superimpose that on top of the existing functioning of the company, the client, then hopefully what you would have is a greater expansion of opportunities on the right-hand side. And that's very important to consider in terms of the phase matching of whatever inputs a company, a client, an organization takes in has to match what decision-making styles they have in ways that they better absorb it, use it, and so on. You know, these are not rhetorical questions. And I'll expand on this even a little bit better. The lessons that we have found are quite broad. The collection, analysis, and dissemination is extremely contextual. If I were to take a case of, say, packaging or bottling, it's not good enough to know that, say, a company like Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola both are interested in bottles and glass. It's more important to know who is in charge of finding this out, what exactly do I need to know, because if not, you could find something that they already know, or they don't care, or that's too futuristic, or too far back in their time horizon. So timing, frameworks, ways to present information are very important. We have found that we have to continuously evolve both the content of what we're doing, how we present it, in what styles. And as far as that goes, we have found, for example, that whereas we used to publish lots of text, nowadays we have gone more graphic, much more use of the internet, the web, presentations, and so on. People tend to have less time to digest text. So they want us to do things faster and in sound bites just about. So we do more presentations, we do much more interaction. And I think that's something that should be considered if one were thinking of intelligence collection in regard to bootstrapping and a DKR. What kinds of multimedia would be appropriate for whom, under what context? One of the challenges that we have found ongoing is, how do you define a multi-client universe? Who all needs to get what kind of information? If you make it too broad, then nobody's interested. If you make it too deep, very few people are interested. And there's literally an art to defining what's the common base that you're going to study collectively. And just for example, in our multi-client designs, it might take us 6 months, sometimes a year, to actually define this and go back and forth with clients. What's needed, what isn't, how, and so on. It's a really difficult exercise. And oftentimes what you find is not what you expected. You know, we have a case sometime back when we decided that the environment was a big deal around 95. And what we found was that the definition of environment was very different for everybody we talked to. There was no commonality that we could find that we could study and sell as a multi-client. And I wouldn't be surprised that this will happen many times over again semantics and syntax are very problematic, and you don't realize this until you actually get in and say, okay, what if we give you this? Would you want it? And oftentimes you get the answer, yes, maybe, and then you come back and say, will you pay for it? And you might get a different answer at that point for different reasons. So these things are not easy to define a priori, and you literally have to go through the exercise. Another thing we have found is that to understand who the clients might be, you have to go to a specific individuals. It's very difficult to get generic titles, that marketers will want this. Actually, you have to find out who and what specifics do they want. And does that match with somebody else's, and enough of a universe to make a syndicated research activity worth pursuing? Other than that, the other challenge that we have found is that to improve the intelligence collection, you need feedback. In order to get better at it, you have to find out what are you doing well, what are you not doing well, and that's very problematic. We tend to get that ad hoc, although we try to get as much information from our clients as we can. It's always difficult, and you always get partial information. And I would like to suggest that even for this colloquium, although the organizers, including myself, have been trying to get feedback, it's always difficult because those who would benefit don't necessarily want to spend the time giving feedback. So there's a dislocation there. And so you usually end up doing what you think is right and then get some sort of feedback, and you kind of go along, but you don't optimize. And that's pretty much what I have. Except one other lesson that we have picked up that's quite interesting, that there's a difference between those who pay and those who use. And they often do not match. And what you get, in terms of request from one, is not what the other one wanted. And you end up bifurcating your responses. And you get into sort of a schizoid situation that's somewhat problematic, but you have to pretty much accept it and go with it and try to satisfy both. And that's pretty much what I have. And I'm hoping that we will have this discussion further on in terms of intelligence collection with respect to DKR and Kodiak, that it's something that it's a practice. It's something that you cannot define beforehand, and it's like a sport. You get better when you do it. So that's pretty much what I have. Thank you.
Well, I think, did Norm leave? Okay, we only have 2 of our victims left. So I'd like to take a few minutes and get some dialogue and questions. Like if I'll ask them something, and then they can ask each other things, and then you guys can ask them for a while. But mine is sort of like, in both cases, you guys were doing things for multi-clients, and you have to go out and sell it to the clients. And so the kind of thing that I'm picturing, which would presumably be different, is that that's part of the business of a NIC, and especially of a meta-NIC, is to keep watching the future and to do the intelligence work. And so they're likely, if they want help, come to you. Could you stand such a difference? But or else another thing is, assumedly, what they'd like to do is they start evolving better processes and methods and tools, etc., by which organizations can do that kind of work. So they may really say, well, why don't we do it and you coach us? So otherwise, it's like saying, how much value could high-performance support teams be to what you guys do?
Do we push the button? Yeah. And keep that question.
This is now being recorded for posterity.
Yes.
Wow. I don't actually personally go out and sell to the clients. So what I get is a kind of backstage view of it, and I suspect there's a kind of inertia about designing the research in order to sell it to the clients, and then try to figure out a way to go ahead and do what you want anyway. And then convince the clients that that's what they wanted all along. But maybe I'm being cynical. I think in a way, when you're talking about the future, companies, and it's usually a group inside the company, isn't sure what they want to know because it's in the future. Unless it's a specific project around which they want to develop some consulting.
If we're talking about
consultancy, so it's.
If we're talking about what a NIC is, it's already a bunch of organizations saying we're going to work together to try, among other things, to keep a better idea on the future, et cetera, like that. So they've already come together in order to pool resources to do this sort of thing. But
I think, in fact, that's what the clients of the Institute are. They are looking for that.
Anyway, okay.
I think my experience is somewhat similar, but with a slight bent that regardless whether you do it on purpose or not, within an organization or outside, there's always a client, and usually they tend to give you answers that don't quite match with what you expected beforehand. And you present stuff, a prototype, and people might say, oh, that's nice, that's really good. And then you come back a month from now and, oh, but we wanted something else. So oftentimes our clients don't know what they want. They agree to things that they haven't approved of and vice versa. It's really problematic. I mean, I wish we had a better way of understanding what clients want more in the consumer arena, sort of, do I buy the shoes or do I not buy the shoes? You know? And in terms of the capabilities and doing this in a feedback loop of sorts, it's also very problematic that the feedback loops are not defined. You never know exactly what you get back.
Ditto.
They may have some questions for a few minutes. And,
the point you made about the people that pay may have different needs than the people who are actually going to use. Could you expand on that? I mean, that's something I've seen in lots of different places, that the decision makers, maybe because they're so disconnected from the actual work that's going on. Anyway.
I think it's a good question, and what we have found is the whole issue that Norm mentioned about alignment is oftentimes nowhere near as clear once you get into the details as from the top level. That, senior managers assume that the whole corporation is aligned. What we found is not necessarily, and particularly when we go at low to middle levels, oftentimes there are almost opposite goals and opposite views. And for us, looking at this from a psychographics perspective, oftentimes what the senior manager wants is a summary, but the operational person wants much more detail. And the lowest person, or say an engineer in the design stage, wants all the data that there's possibly to be gotten from the world. And, how do you then gauge what kind of package can you sell to multiple buyers is really problematic. And oftentimes then somebody approves and then the other person doesn't like. It goes back and forth. I mean, it's really not just about money, but it's understanding of what's useful.
okay,
I'm reminded of that old saying that chickens don't buy chicken feed, farmers do.
Short one.
I was wondering, this is sort of to both of you, if you find in the new media any solutions to that problem, in that through linkages and layers and having the ability to have, let's say, a graphic organizer, and within that it links to a summary, and that in turn can link to in-depth information, if you're beginning to use that, if that somewhat addresses this issue.
We are experimenting with that and trying to find different ways of shaping the reports and the information so that it's accessible at different levels. And we had a meeting on it the other day. I think there are a lot of ideas coming out about how to do that. There's so many different learning strategies and needs that people have, and finding some efficient way of tailoring all of that information to meet all of the various clients' needs is it's a non-trivial problem. Maybe storytelling is the answer here.
Well, if you think about it, I think those are just just examples of what the knowledge environment's going to be in the future. That what does an organization need? What are the different divisions and projects and parts of it need, etc., are going to be changing, and the business about being able to generate usable knowledge as it shifts and portray it is it's just going to be more universal, and it has to be a continuing thing, and it may or may not be something you outsource like this. So anyway, I think we move on. I had more things to say. Up. Go ahead.
I just had one little anecdote, and it has to do with the whole knowledge management issue. And it's a story I love. It's a very large consumer products company that was denied a patent on the grounds that they already owned it.
World's probably full of that. Yeah. Well, I want to, Neil?
There's a question that comes up here, and that's just sort of sorry. There's a question that all this discussion prompts in my mind, and that is, do we have to be thinking about storing knowledge in lots of different ways? You know, actually taking the time to actually put the knowledge away in different forms so that different people can retrieve it and understand what it's about? Or do we think we're clever enough to have the viewers change it into the form that people need?
Well, that's such a general problem. I don't think you have to lay it on them. But
coming from different, because basically you are providing different views. You know, stories versus neat little charts versus, you know, reports and things. In the disability field, we have the problem of converting information that was meant for a graphical user interface into a form that works for blind people. It's a huge job. It would be a lot easier if there was a Word version of it.
I think the way we're trying to deal with this is put what used to be our reports, documents, on the web and assume that that is accessible by everyone. And then from there, start seeing how many of our clients want what, and then we start doing that almost on an ad hoc basis. Presentations, conversations, and so on, because it's too expensive to do it in a formal, organized fashion until we have enough. Say half of our clients want it this way, and then we optimize it and go with that. But otherwise, the whole issue of conversion, I think, is really problematic. And ideally, maybe if there were a way to do it with XML and then turn the knob and make it graphic or make it textual or stories or something, but I don't know anything along the horizon that's going to do this in any easy way yet. Maybe there are, I don't know.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because when I use the terms portrayal and views that are what we have to be more flexible about generating on the fly, that's the kind of thing I mean. And that's the kind of thing where high-performance support teams come flying in and say, how do I do that for you? But that's a little bit downstream. You got something else to say?
I was just going to say, I don't think it's an opposition between stories and graphics. They're mutually supportive. What's happening is that there's a real shift in the way the information is organized initially, so that instead of going into formal reports that can be 50, 60, 70 pages long, it's broken up into what I long ago called NITs, narrative units. They're small things that can be hypertextually linked back and forth. And I think that's changing the way people are thinking and experiencing even literature, for example. That this is going to have a big impact. So it's going to come in a new generation that thinks this way, as opposed to the formal essay structure that we're all used to.
The problem that we're experiencing at the moment is we did the blind over when the GUI came, and now the multimedia is making life really difficult for deaf people, because information was always available in a printed form. But now a lot of the key information is being presented in a verbal form, and there is no translation of it, so we have to develop technologies to do that. But I'd bring up the question is, should we as a society be thinking of, we need to have different views for different cognitive levels, for different perceptual levels?
Absolutely. And furthermore, as things are moving faster, you say, well, there are a lot of things we can't spoon feed important people. that they have to get in and be learning all the time. So then we all think that the learning systems go in for the K-12 and universities, etc. But they're just going to be continually. Everybody's going to have to keep learning. So how do you provide it for that is important. And so your knowledge repository essentially needs, in a way, to sort of be very flexibly adaptable for whatever learning techniques there are for grabbing and showing and digesting and testing, etc. And so it's just all going to be evolving together, and it's a good example to bring out. But, I've got some things I've been wanting to dig out too. There's been a problem for me of I show diagrams, etc., make statements, but I don't know how they hit you. So I'm going to try something here. That I'm going through some of these. I got five slides of which you've seen before. What I'd like to do is spend a few minutes with each one up there and say, hey, what kind of questions and comments come from you guys about this? So here's the first one. Okay, I would enjoy hearing some questions or comments, or what do you see when you look at this? I just think it's so rich.
Well, one of the first things I see is I want to know more about those different tool system and human system. Do you have drill down deeper to enumerate more about what's in them, what they consist of, how they interact, any?
Oh, you by any chance an engineer? Oh, surprising. Now I want somebody to ask about this left side too.
I meant the human system also.
Oh,
both sides.
Oh, great. All right. Well, I got some good interactions just in the last year with people trying to go down inside that, and also in the middle one. What's a capability infrastructure like within your organization? See, what are the major capabilities up high? What do they depend upon? And it sort of spreads on down like this. And down at the medium to low level, there's some very, very basic ones about how people write and talk and interact and communicate, and et cetera, like that. And those are things that are going to get affected tremendously in the future. So when they get affected like that, it's going to mean the layers above them in the infrastructure would adapt to harness that. So it's because such fundamental things down low in that infrastructure will be impacted so heavily. If we really look about how our knowledge work, our thinking and our collaborating are going to change, then that changes a lot. And it even goes down into the human, the changes in the way you're going to harness what you sense and perceive and can actuate, etc., and what goes on in your head, both conscious and unconscious, is going to shift a lot. And it's just it's a very good lesson to learn as you watch how you operate through different kinds of activities, what kind of unconscious skills you have that had to develop.
It's implicit in your structure, but I just want to make explicit. Our culture tends to think of knowledge as what is between our ears instead of what's between people. It's a relationship between us and the external world. But knowledge is very, very much of a social process and emerges in a social dynamic. And as I said, that's implicit in there, but it might be good to try to get at it more explicitly.
That's great. I would really like to have some working groups get together with me, and as weeks go by, really trying to drill down in those things. So I do it by myself, and it sort of runs off the table. And anyway, so
Hi, I was wondering if you had anything in here about how to deal with failure. Is that dealing with failure something in paradigms or procedures or customs? Because it seems to me that when we make our own failures more visible by having a knowledge repository that confronts us with the fact that we failed time and again last week, we have to learn to live with that. And it's very uncomfortable for some folks. And I think we need training in living with the fact that we are really failing a lot more often than we convince ourselves we are.
Absolutely. These are kind of things that you can bring up, that you're going to get more collaboration. And it goes down in the unconscious part of the human, too, of how you unconsciously deal with other people, or how you react and send messages to them about, oh, you failed, huh, or something. Or if you're just supportive, oh, well, let's try again. And it reminds me of my one shot at making an aphorism. Did I tell you about earning $35? That somehow it fell into the hands of Reader's Digest, and they actually published it as a footnote someplace. You know, they have a little clever app for it. Mine is, the rate at which you can mature is directly proportional to the embarrassment you can tolerate. See? Right. So maybe we can build that kind of thing into a social sense in a larger scale. But anyway, there's just so much richness all through those things there. And the little funny thing about technology exploding on that right-hand column is just pervades all through that to make changes. And over again today we're trapped into looking at the technologies there to sort of automate the kind of things we used to do instead of it. So this is why I really want to spend some more time today drilling down in there to say there are things one can do about how the technology and people can work together that would start to make a real difference. And that's something I'd like to toss up to people too. But before that, I got a few more of these.
What are those capability infrastructures that have identified so far, and is that published anywhere?
Sorry. I wish. I mean, see, sometimes when people pat me in the back to give me awards, I say, well, it's really, there's so much left to do, and I don't know how to do a lot of it. So we need to collaborate. And that's a dirty word, I know, but I mean, that's why we need an evolutionary environment. Okay?
Speaking of stories, a lot of our when we analyze things so far, eventually they get a little bit fuzzy. And many of the things that, the stories that our many cultures are built on are really myths of various kind. I don't mean myths in the sense that they're untrue, but they're perhaps symbolic stories in many cases. And someone who's very famous for pursuing this was Joseph Campbell, where he made studies across different cultures and across different times to try and extract what might be almost cultural invariants for different types of societies. And if we're going to look at some of this sort of thing, it might be useful to read some of his work or see some of his videotapes.
Now, when you start looking at more of these things, there's a term we use, Kodiak. We're trying to identify the core set of capabilities to be collectively smarter. And the middle initial I for integration is just a terrific challenge, because it's like saying, oh, look, there are all these kind of things sitting around that people have generated and come out with over the years, and somehow they have to get integrated. And so that we can integrate them into a sort of useful body of understanding and knowledge. And I look at a lot of the books that are out there and I, oh boy, but somehow that the situation's only going to get worse. So really striving to find out how we collectively can do that, integration into applicable form is just terribly important. So every time I hear about something like that, and there have been people putting things on our forum that I look at and say, oh boy, like young man Eric here just pours out books like stuff in there, like say, so pretty soon I'm going to challenge him, like say, well, hey, who better to start integrating that? But anyway, it's just extremely important kind of a capability, and it's going to take special focus to do that. Well, let's go to a second slide that you see a lot of. And what does this do for people against them or to them or something? It's a very, very important one in my framework. Oh boy, I can remember for a few years I was a young aspiring professor at Berkeley, and I used to begin realizing that, oh, everybody that's been through very much schooling has that face where they bring up a question and they look there and they look just interested enough, just awake enough, etc., so you won't call on because you think they're asleep, but not enough to be called on. So suddenly that becomes that professional student face out there.
The thing I like in this diagram whenever I see it is all those interconnections, and that you call out the concurrency, that you really are going to be doing these things at the same time. But one of the questions I have when I look at it is I keep looking at the size of the little ones under there, you know, and going, okay, now what's going on underneath that supports these pieces? And especially when I look at the kind of dialogue we have been having in the online discussion and how we take that and make that into a real DKR, and what does that take? What do we really need to do to support that recorded dialogue and intelligence collection and knowledge products, especially when you think about some of Neil's concerns for other people with different capabilities. Yeah. Is that all happening under here, and what does that take for us? How do we do that?
It's been done organically and slowly and imperfect ways for a long time. But, you know, as the world's changing so fast, that's part of the scaling thing we put attention to before, is that, hey, the issues are going to be more complex and they'll be happening faster, and we've got to have, we'll fall apart if we don't find a better way to manage. So then when I put Kodiak down as the challenge for that, it's there like that. So what do you see, what's this knowledge products box mean to you? Boy, what a marvelous quick transformation.
I'm noticing that what you're not making clear here is that the DKR has to be contributed to by everybody. Everybody is an author in this, because if you have a meeting and you don't put it into your DKR, your personal knowledge repository about what happened at that meeting, it's gone. You have to collect it, and if you collect it, you can share it quite effectively. I mean, you've seen Rod Welch's stuff.
That's part of recorded dialogue in my book. Right, what goes on. The stuff that's going to be valuable from the interactions between people, from your own notes, in fact.
Well, but the point that Rod makes is that you have to go back over your appointments for today and say what it was that happened and what needs to happen next on each of those things.
Great. That's integration.
Yep.
And then you also have your intelligence collection and what's happening there. So the dialogue is about what's in the intelligence box that's coming in. It's also the knowledge products over here is the current summary status. That's where you're applicable. You go find it. And so this is why I've been...
My main point is that this is not something somebody can do for you.
Well, that's right. Everybody has to be a part of it. That's what that concurrency thing is. You've got to be concurrently doing your part while your team is doing its, while the project, while the da-da-da-da, like that. And that concurrency thing, you know, integration, all that's tough. But boy, the concurrency one is the real challenge. And that's the kind of thing that leads out to say, boy, we cannot have islands. We can't have, these guys are using Microsoft and using Lotus Notes, and therefore they're islands. This is why the standards for the way the documents are and the way the communications are just have to evolve. And then the evolution of that's got to be a lot more than just what comes out every 2 years or something as the next version. So the evolutionary process for that whole thing to grow is part of it. And that knowledge product we used to call the handbook. And then people start objecting and say, well, that connotes something too much. Well, then during some of the meetings people say, well, what about calling it the encyclopedia? Well, it's got the same sense to it, that it's what you actually try to make it where you go find what it is you need to know about the current state. And if there's given issues flying around like that, what's the current state? And if you're not quite sure of that, you should be able to backtrack on the steps of that issue development. So the IBIS and GIBIS people just got something very much important. And the backlink management, etc., like that is just extremely important in there.
So do you have a list of 20 or 30 of these DKRs that are analyzed for how good they are and how effective they are?
No, that's what I was going to get Norm McEachran to, but he left too soon. No, see, this is one of the things that needs doing inside this kind of improvement infrastructure is to learn how to give the kind of ratings and benchmarkings as how well is this being done. And it'd be just terrific when that gets going downstream and you say, well, this corporation, you know, that advertises that it's going to be doing all kinds of things in its products for people, but it rates very low internally for doing this. So how come they're telling us what to do? Or, you know, individuals, it's sort of the rating individuals need to have is stuff like that. Is because things are changing rapidly and you can't say, hey, I got good grades in high school, what the hell? It's just that that'll last how much time? So anyway, the think of benchmarking or having ratings so that you know where you rate. And if you come to work someplace and they look at you and say, well, these different categories, but gee, your general knowledge management is just low. You haven't upgraded. You know, that sort of rating that you had, a fourth class this or that or something like that, was fine 2 years ago, but things have moved on. So now that's sort of in lower. So in order for you to keep up with your peers, you're going to have to move yourself up some notches. John?
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of follow up on that question. A concern I have about this picture is the implied amount of overhead.
Amount of what?
The amount of overhead that's implied here, not just the matter, for example, of making us all responsible for noting down what got said, but, and this relates to Neil's question earlier, to make that information useful, you have to add information to it, meta information,
sure,
to provide hooks and links and summaries and this and that and the other. And I've never seen a system where that could be provided automatically. In other words, to me, it boils down to the large philosophical question of where does meaning come from anyway, right? And it seems to keep coming back to the meaning has to be provided by the people. So this relates to what Neil asked, because in trying to get for sight impaired people, trying to get the reason things are so flat is because there's information, hierarchical logical information, being conveyed visually by the spatial organization of things on a page that isn't going to come through in the bare text. And adding that information is, you always get an added 20 or 30 or 40% effort. And my problem with this is that to make this work, we have to actually put more time into the information, whereas what we're being pressed to do constantly is spend less time doing it. And I don't understand the way out of that dilemma.
I get it. But that's part of what's going to happen anyway. More and more complexity happening more and more rapidly. How are you going to cope? And if you look at that, and a big central part of coping is how do you do this integration of innovative ideas, thoughts, issues, etc., like that, and keep track of what it is you need to know to be applicable. So it's going to take more overhead, and therefore it becomes more of a team sort of thing. And you says, well, the trade-off of that would be that, as Jeff Rulson likes to talk about, boosting your collective IQ, is that, 10 people can now do what 20 used to, as a team effort, etc. So somehow in there that it's got to be done. And so you say, okay, what are the practices? And for one of the things I'm really interested in, like you mentioned, people have a discussion. Well, I've got one of these speech recognizers, and I want to start training it. And what I'd like to do next is a sort of a thing in which, when I call up somebody or talk to them, that they've got one of their own, which may be a different brand, but it works. And so, hey, there's a little network kind of connection between the two, and they sort of fuse into transcript of your dialogue. And that you'll learn as you go along like that how to make tags as you're talking, etc., just as a natural sort of thing. And you also have smart agents that you can start calling on to do things that today how do you juggle and use those? So the world's going to be more complex, and if we're going to sort of survive in some sort of sane way, coherent way, we have to learn how to deal with it. And the central part of it is the way you do with your knowledge. Eric, you're a cause of some of this, so...
Yeah, I wanted to reply somewhat to what John was saying. I think he's absolutely right that the necessity to add information to get value out starts to become a limiting factor. And so I think the high leverage point is to work with the information you're already recording in the form of documents, I think, specifically at this point, although I think the multimedia does become important as we go forward. But we're already recording design documents. We're already having design decisions. And to the extent that we can capture those and relate them to what we're doing, I think we can get a high percentage return for a lower percentage effort, not a 0%, but certainly lower than trying to track every meeting I've been to.
Well, it depends on what you mean by tracking. But one of the things that would be interesting to do is to lay out some propositions and see what how they vote about what's going to happen someday. And then maybe they bet on it or something. But I think it'd be very, very interesting about the kind of changes. It's like if you look at the automobile transportation or something, and if you told somebody 100 years ago, they just couldn't believe that you'd spend that much money on a wagon, and that you could travel so far, and et cetera, et cetera. But things changed. So anyway, I'm betting that we'll get better at that, and a lot of things will change, and that there are a lot of things like as you walk along. When you walk along in your day, you'll learn how to drop off the tags and the meta kind of stuff when you toss it out. It'll be part of your skill instead of just talking and walking away. You got a turn?
I want to address part of that also and raise another issue which is related. And I think part of what you have to consider within the bigger picture is that the DKR can't necessarily be the end-all, be-all solution. I mean, the person who's actually using the knowledge that's stored within the DKR has to bring something to that. And ideally, we want to take all that information that's stored in people's head and make it available to others. But maybe, realistically, it has to be the responsibility of the person coming in and looking at the information to understand the context of the information, or to go and discover in other ways what the context of that information is. So, people who are looking at design documents who don't understand things, I mean, there's that social process, the human system side, the left side of the previous chart, where people learn things by, they read the documents, and it's converted by knowledge by discussing it with other people and clarifying things that way. The comment I want to raise, which I think is also related, and which may very well kind of refute what I just said, was it's a point that Marcella made, and it's a point that concerns me about this document, and it's about context. If intelligence collection is, if the context is so important in determining what you're trying to collect, does that act as an impediment to the scalability of this? In other words, if you're going to take a bunch of DKRs, and the DKRs are so contextual in nature, is that going to be useful if you try and group them together and have other people look at the information and try and gather knowledge out of that?
Well, I've got all the answers written down here. No, the sort of feeling I have is that more and more, because it's going to get such a strenuous job to do the scenarios and the intelligence collection, that'll be something sensibly shared out there, so that your larger communities are going to be doing that as just a matter of course all the time.
I have a comment on that, sort of following what you just said. I'm reminded of what happened with object-oriented software. And at SRI, there's a fellow who did a project some time back looking at when did writing software in the sense of objects was cost-effective. And he found that they had to be reused at least 5 to 10 times before it was worthwhile. I think it comes back to this. Unless there's sort of a scale-up, then the overhead kills you. But once there is a scale-up that's large enough, the overhead is not that important. And the question then is how to get up enough, high enough, so that the scaling is favorable. And I think the problem is, how do you start then? To get enough folks involved with low enough overhead, and then, get all the benefits.
Well, I still have a couple more slides to
What this suggests when you first look at it is that each of those circles is a self-contained blob of knowledge about something. But if all of us went home and we write a report, we put our stuff into our own blob, we still haven't really accumulated what happened in this meeting. And so it's not clear from that who the blob belongs to. Do I belong to many blobs, or do I have a blob around me? I think that is the thing, because I was going to ask the question before John came up was, my understanding of database indexing is that implies so much that can it ever be done? And that was my concern, unless people put the knowledge into the correct blob, and that's the individual responsibility.
Well, you've got something there, and it's the kind of thing we have to do. And when I talk about high-performance support teams, it's like saying, in there to help in some of those things, can they fly better, move better, like that. So this is a challenge, and I really appreciate getting this kind of dialogue, and I'd like to get a few more of these different slides that are basic like that. And thank you very much, Neil.
I tried to think weird, because I was fascinated. I read in a science magazine a while ago that our olfactory system was actually what is used to make our neurons grow to the right place when we're forming. Yeah. It's olfactory. It smells its way to your fingertip. And I just throw it in so fertile minds can think, how do we put olfactory nodes into this so that the neurons will smell their way to the right place?
No, but these are kind of portrayals that kind of help talk about the scale of the challenge. See?
Is it mention how one knows?
Instinct.
Instinct, huh?
They smell a story here.
The one thing that it occurs to me when I look at this picture is that the knowledge products, intelligence collection, recorded dialogues in a higher level of the organization. Say we have a group, a division, and a company, for instance. If you were to take the collection of those things from a given, a collection of groups, what's going to make it useful to say a division is some kind of inference. That is to say, you have to take the stories learned from each one of these individual ones, generalize it to some level, and make it useful for the entire corporation. The marketing people and the engineering people and the sales people are all different cultures, but there's interesting lessons to be learned from each of them, and since they're in the same pool, that division, there's got to be some common thing. So if you're going to build one of these things, it seems like you're going to need some facility to cheaply and easily allow some group of people at the division level to quickly generalize or create generalizations that may be partially true, partially false, and then support those generalizations with specific cases pointed to in the individual dynamic knowledge repositories at the level below it. And there's a couple of techniques for doing that. You can simply point to them with links. You could annotate the links with what whoever created the generalization thought was interesting about that in creating that. Or you could use storytelling or hearsay, or the Xerox repair people sit around the lounges telling war stories, and war stories are a great way of communicating information across organizations that don't have a lot in common. So if you're going to build a system like this, it seems like you're going to have to build that capability of generalization, and then looking at generalizations that may or may not be true, rating them, even allowing people to rate them eventually, and then support those generalizations or dispute those generalizations with specific instances at the lower levels. So,
I mean, to say, I agree, and that would be some kinds of things. A lot of these things got to be tried and evolved. That's why the evolutionary environment that you try to go after these things, not just in one organization, but out here in a big scale, has to take place. And I'd really like to go on, but anyway, you get a turn, and you had one.
Very short then. Do you really think that there'll be multiple DKRs or one big DKR with people usually living in only parts of it? Because it seems that one of the problems that comes up is with this alignment question that came up earlier and what we were just talking about generalizing to the divisional level. It's not just information and flowing up, it's also those ideas flowing back down, and when it all gets linked together, is there just one big DKR or multiple ones?
Well, they all have to be interlinked. And so when do you say it's and then there are lots of questions dynamically about, say, if I link to something you've got, then there has to be some kind of understanding between us about how permanent yours is or what changes or the access control or something like that. So we've thought about a lot of the details of these things, and that's what I'd hope to sort of give a short presentation about what we'd like to kick off early on about something that would be different and could evolve. But I really, this is just extremely valuable for me, because when I toss these things up and say, you know, I have the meaning that's built into my mind about this thing, and so I put it up there to carry that kind of meaning, and then I don't know how much it carries with people. So I needed this. That's what I put in one slide. I says, well, you may not need it, but I do, to have these things go ahead. So here's the second of that, and here's the third one, sort of. So what kind of meaning and issues and questions, etc., does that bring to you?
Well, one of the things that comes up and has been coming up with you starting to put this out there is tool system utilization, human system development. It seems like a lot of those things are not yet done. I mean, like with tool systems, like, okay, so there's this new thing with the internet now, so there's a lot more capabilities out there, and how do we use them? So that may be pushing out there, and we don't know how to use them. Human system development, I don't know what's been developed that isn't being used, or you know.
That's frontier to explore. So it's really kind of the ones in the green envelope are the ones used today, and how are we going to move out into that space?
I guess the question is how much of that on the axis is exploring and developing new tools and new human systems, and how much is just simply applying the ones that someone else has made up?
Well, one thing about the marketplace that's pretty clever about not putting things out that they don't think will sell and such. So see, the mouse doesn't work on this, and it's really true. I just don't know how to work the other one very well. It's not that I'm biased. Oops. So anyway, I can't move the cursor around effectively without. It also seems to advance. This is somebody else's machine that was substituted because I absentmindedly did not. But anyway, where all those outposts are sitting are assumed to be sort of out beyond what you'd expect to see any organization using, and the necessity of exploring that space. And it's really a multi-dimensional space with a lot of things out there that we can't picture. So this is what we talk about scenarios and case studies or something of how do we provide some kind of a useful picture of what's probably out there to go after. What kinds of new tools and new techniques and processes and customs and skills, all the things in both the human and tool system. And so what one perceives and assumes how far up those boundaries are, the frontier, it makes a huge difference then in how much they will sort of want to invest in exploring it. So this prevailing paradigm is what I sort of give the label for where people think those boundaries are. And if they think, oh, we already have the internet, we already have webs, and we already have e-commerce and such, boy, we're practically there. See? And so it's really a big thing. Did you have a question? Okay.
One thing I don't get from this diagram, but I hear in the talk, I'm not sure how to do it visually, but I think it would be worth talking about, was the question that came up about the hope in the stories of okay, we've got this ways to go, and we have these outposts, and if there's some way to show, maybe with an overlay, that that these can evolve and that we can go beyond this little green thing so that it can keep moving. Because the one problem I have with this is those outposts look kind of lonely out there, and I'm going, well, how are we going to get there? Can we show somehow that it's possible to do if we keep moving these systems, if we keep co-evolving? And that I think can maybe motivate people to put some energy, money, commitment, effort into it, knowing that they can get out there and that there are rewards to doing that.
So that's the things you have to create are at least more technology kind of tools that potentially could be applied out there. Then you have to say, how do you put them to work? And then the whole question about where you put them to work so that it's realistic. And then the whole thing about every organization that's going to have to evolve moving out there has to get this sort of implicit and explicit kind of feeling and knowledge, etc., about where it wants to go, etc. So that's all part of it. So this is why I want to start talking about some of the things in the tool system that you could kick off something that's an evolutionary base, and the kind of criteria using for it is saying it has to work with what other people are already using. So then you have to have higher performance capabilities moving around that will do things maybe with that knowledge bases and the web pages and so on that people aren't using them now. And then you have to give it at some time so quite a few people can see it in that context and have an evolution. So it doesn't have to wait till it comes out in some big product. So having that evolutionary tool system is just, there's just no way you're going to get the real evolution unless you can, tool systems can be evolving like that open source provides for now. So anyway.
Hi, I'm Pete Jacobs. One of the things that occurs to me when I look at these various charts and the modules of information that we look at in Colloquium, it might be helpful, at least to me, to see some sort of a graph or a representation of that area, if you want to think of it that way, that space that represents the difference between what is desired at any given point and what is attainable. I'm thinking, for example, about a gradient that might start out with something like the unknown and then go into confusion and then deal with something, for example, like conflict. And that's present in each of the things that we've been talking about right along. I'm thinking about even adversarial situations where you have, for example, like in the intelligence community, might not want to give up its authority and power, and it's hiding behind a dark cloak. You have governments that might not want to give up power to democratic systems like a DKR, and so forth. So if you had one graph, that might serve purposes to help explain all of these others in some of the questions that have been raised about them.
I mean, I wouldn't even know how to start with that because I don't get the picture, but would you like to sort of help me try to do something like that?
I'd be glad to help you. If perhaps I haven't been that articulate. It's just that I see that that seems to be present in all of the things we discuss. There seems to be a starting point where we are. We never quite know where we're going because we are involved in an evolutionary system.
Right.
And so there's always a chase going on between the verb and the noun, the lion and the antelope, so to speak. You know, the object-oriented software, even. You could think of it that way.
So then to me there's a big challenge of saying, how do you set up the evolutionary environment that would be the healthiest that you could do? And
I think the evolutionary environment, in a sense, is the thing that's undefined. But it does have certain known characteristics. And we tend to use these terms that, well, we're confused now. Where do we go from here? Or so-and-so over there disagrees. Or how do we get from this point to that point? Or what is it that we want? Those are all, to me, different ways of saying or defining in vague ways and sometimes very accurate ways this unknown territory. And in a sense, to me at least, it's a continuity or a string or a glue or however you might want to think of it that ties together all of these charts and all of the things that we always talk about. It's always present in those discussions, but it's never the subject itself. And so we find, at least I find, that we're kind of chasing our tails sometimes because we say, well, how do we get from here to there? And you say, well, when we get there, we'll have to figure out what we'll do about that, or we'll have to figure out a way to get there because it's part of the evolution. And so it just becomes language without practice and without knowing what that terrain really looks like in abstract terms.
Well, if you can turn it into something more concrete, that's great. And that the way that I do is it's sort of like, hey, you're painting a space out there, and some of these concepts are what can be used to really help formulate the basis of what would a strategy be. And so, yeah, part of the strategy's got to be that you have ways to show people or satisfy those kinds of questions. And well, anyway, so other than that, I don't know how to help. So why don't we, hey, Ade, you've got something to say.
As I look at this co-evolution map, it occurs to me that some of the outposts we're seeing is what you normally do when you are taking risks. For the human development system, I would say the evolution of an economic system, a capital market system, has tried to do the evolution. And that some of the critique we have of that market system is that it's not efficient enough to cope with the rate of change of the complexity. So I would in fact say that, I mean, a lot of those outposts, people talk about loneliness or who will pay for it. So the factor of how do we in fact make the risks or the failures, as people say that are bound to happen, more teachable to us. People take risks, they fail these days in the evolutionary system, but the rest of us do not benefit from those failures. So I would almost say people feel right now that the capital market is the way the evolution is taking place, and it's a critique of the inefficiency of that system. So it gives us something that we have used to date and begins to say, how can we in fact change our economic practices to cope with the problem? So that's one contribution I have for this evolution. On the tool system side, the engineering discipline has coped with it very well. For the human system, if you use the term social engineering, it carries a lot of baggage with it. And I mean, for systematic social evolution, I mean, it just has a historical baggage. So one can't almost go on that axis without sounding, it's just not, people don't like that term social engineering. But they're comfortable with the term markets, capitalism as a way of evolving the social mechanism. So I think there's a sense in which it's a good graph, but the language, like the last speaker said, of talking about them could be a bit of a difficulty.
Right. There have been a few difficulties over the decades in, in communicating, but the longer I stay with this, the more my intuition says it's pretty high probability. There's another one that if you say, well, out of any organization, there are kind of products that it produces. You know, knowledge, what universities put out something, or research people put out something, or manufacturing people put out something. And so I said, what if you sort of divide that set of output into two kinds? One kind is a candidate that if you feed it back in to your improvement process, it can improve the improvement process. So that's a fundamental sort of picture about bootstrapping. If there isn't any feedback like that, then your organization can't intrinsically in itself do a bootstrapping. But if you join something larger and start pooling it, that you can contribute things that the others can also contribute, but among you all can produce things that can come back and do that bootstrapping. So the term bootstrapping somehow, to me, has to be tied with what comes back to improve your improvement process. And so that's why that picture is there. And I hear people use the term in ways that sometimes make me wince. It's okay for people to generate their own ideas for what it is, but not if they're trying to echo or say what I've been trying to say. So, are there questions about this particular thing?
The piece that I don't see is the part that you just said, which is the interaction between the different organisms, organizations. And I feel like that needs to be part of the feedback loop too.
Well, it is. I made another one in which you had a bunch of these sitting there with various amounts of what could come out, and they pooled and came back to all of them. But it's sort of that coming back to improve your improvement that's the bootstrapping sense. So it's the sort of thing like, on a national scale, if they decided we're going to start investing more federal money in boosting the nation's improvement infrastructure. Well, first you got to go through and kind of clarify what that is, et cetera, like that. But anyway, so that could be a large-scale sort of issue. And
I think by bootstrapping now you mean establishing a positive feedback loop.
Right.
That's not completely obvious to everybody.
What I'm saying, that's the first place I heard about what a bootstrap was. It was called a bootstrap circuit in a radar set, which was just positive feedback, like that. So that was there a long time, and then I remember reading about. Well, anyway, but somehow it just trying to identify that strategically, if we're going to invest money in trying to improve things, hey, as early as possible, it'd be nice to improve what can improve the improvement process. And on a scale like that. So if we look at the kind of capability improvement challenge that's out there with the way the world's changing and happening, he says, wow, we really got a challenge. So he says, okay, that's one way.
So part of this is about developing a clear view, but then I have to caution you never to confuse a clear vision with a short path.
With a short what?
A short path to completing that vision.
Oh. Yeah. Right. So I actually had a little bit of practical training as an engineer. One of the things I just like to distinguish about that, they like to build it to see it work and then improve it. And that reflects in the strategy I talk about just tremendously. So that's what these high-performance teams are something you can build and put them to work. And not to build them and just watch them play games or demonstrate that they can jump around very flexibly, but really put them to work in key places. Okay, what does this tell you? Well, we can move on then. But, it sort of uses the ABCs and pooling your C resources. And so you've got an improvement community, and we say if you're really trying to do it in the kind of networked way, we say we will let you use the term NIC. And then we point out that, NICs themselves would like to improve. So if they form an improvement community that's a NIC, then that's a good way for them to bootstrap their way up. So that's what we call a meta-NIC, and we said that's going to be a very key thing in there. So it's part of a scalable, we think, infrastructure for improving, for bootstrapping. Okay.
Yes, this is sort of... Ray Glock-Renick again. This is sort of going back to probably number 2, what the concept of a knowledge product, my remarks addressed to. And in a sense, I'm seeing knowledge products as we've traditionally experienced them, as being either something that is relatively static, but attempts to be comprehensive, as connoted by the word encyclopedia, or alternatively is dynamic and ongoing and current, but is not comprehensive, but is a particular point, either a point of research report or a point of a new insight or whatever, which is connoted by the term journal. And part of the difficulty is that the encyclopedia or the static is by definition, as soon as we have this comprehensive scheme, it's obsolete by the time we even begin to articulate its second sentence. But unless we are willing to go ahead and tolerate an obsolete presentation, we'll never get the sense of wholeness. So we sort of have these trade-offs in our knowledge products of either you're obsolete or you're so fragmented that you are not unintegrated. And that's what I like about the Kodiak concept, because it's an invitation to somehow participate in the development of, participate in the experience, I should say, of both of these kinds of knowledge products simultaneously. And so while we currently, I mean, we have, our encyclopedias will have our 17th and 18th editions of it, whereas the more dynamic things, the current things, like when you cite an internet site, you have to say this was the way it was on December 19th, 1998.
No, that's all right.
At any rate, I'm just saying that somehow part of this, I think, has to be how we can integrate the static with the dynamic in our knowledge products.
That's, in the NIC and the meta-NIC level, that's a very central concern at that level, how you do that, because the hypothesis is that Kodiak dynamic repository of something is very central in how you run a NIC effectively, and yet we really know, though, that the NIC, you have to transfer experience also, and so you have to have people getting involved at the NIC level and moving back and forth from the members. That's something, I don't know if we've made clear that that's part of the picture, but there's just no way it's going to happen just electronically for some time until we have very much sort of virtual being together.
I want to reply to part of that in general outline, certainly not in specifics. When you're talking about encyclopedia, you're talking about a codified knowledge base, where the journal you're talking about a point in time, as you say, what we know. And one of Marcelo's slides really caught my eye today, the one that said education on demand. I mean, just as a blanket concept, what a knowledge repository has to be fundamentally is a system that educates you on demand on a specific subject and gives you the information you need at whatever, to compensate for whatever your level of ignorance is, which in mine frequently is massive, outside one specialty area. Outside of that, all of us, I'd like to say we're all ignorant on a vast variety of subjects, whether it's plumbing or, I was with ditch diggers once, and there's an amazing number of things to know about the best way to dig a ditch. If you look at doctors, there's this huge repository of medical knowledge growing every day. By the time they graduate, they're already 10 years out of date. They need a system that will educate them on demand when they're facing something new. And that, in general outline, has to be the solution to the problem.
Well, that's been a basic picture all along about how you integrate the teaching machine, or whatever you want to call it, educational facility with it, so that in the actual structuring of your knowledge products, you have to provide for that kind of hooks and guides, etc., so that you can have learning on demand. It's just an integral part. We're going to get shut down in a minute, so I have to kind of close off the meeting, and we can go down to the pizza and beer, etc. place and finish this afterwards. I just needed to close up by just pointing out that in this large-scale sort of problem situation we have, it's large-scale in another sense. It goes from the big to the very small, and that they're down in the details of some of the important things that we have to start getting going. And one of those are some of the new things we've got to sort of get worked into the tool system that start helping do things like flexibly portray, more flexibly portray, and really break away from the what you see is what you get version of a page. And that opens up a lot of interesting potentials. You know, some of it's like, hey, you can color code. You can have smart agents that can parse the statements and color code the parts of speech. And hey, how much training and skill would it take before that helps you just go through much faster? Well, you know, people can try it, but what they really have to do is also put it to work and see what role it would play in there and what kind of skill. And there are a bunch of other things too. So we started painting a little design of, we got, in session 4 we started pointing out how with this web-based intermediary that's something that IBM puts on the market, and I don't know if that's terribly unique, but it offers a lot of things that you could, between your browser and the end products, you can have this thing that will translate for you. So what kind of translations? Oh, great. When we go get something, we tell this what we want to get, and we can also tell it that when we get it, what we want to see is a particular view. So it can transform, transcode that, and you have to trust it still not to distort what's there, but just give you the view you wanted, etc. So then it's something that could start being available to people browsing around inside our world, or even from our world looking out to others. So it would be just a marvelous kind of experience. Another thing it can do is says, oh, you just name the kind of programming source code, C, C++, you know, Java, something like that, and you can make transcoding and stuff so that it would be addressable, as though you're addressing a point in there, that it goes and gets it, transforms it to what it takes to portray it on your browser, and could actually install tags in there that could become target points for links. So every time you see it, it's got those tags on it, which you can use for spot linking. So then you say, great, that could make a lot of difference out in the programming world. The specifications and everything else go together, and yeah, oh good. We could also do it for computer-aided design systems, get conventions for we could do this. So that sort of thing is something that doesn't wait for a big ponderous new applications coming out like that. We could experiment with things like that that would reveal and show stuff a lot. And so that we actually want to get something started like that. So we've got some volunteer energy going, and we hope we can push some doorbells for other places to do it. But something like that can come into other people's world and sort of show them how you can go look at whatever you want to. You know, look, hey, I can go look at a Word document now and see it in the different ways, or Lotus Notes, or whatever you have, or spreadsheets, or something like that. So this transcoding into an intermediary just opens up tremendous things to experiment with, and maybe actually produce some sort of, you know, it's a way to say, look, what if we call this OHS 1, and next month it's going to go up and change, and we're going to get more and more ideas. Like there are people out there that have been experimenting with all kinds of really interesting sort of ways in which you can depict knowledge, study it, take it apart, parse it, schematic, sketch it, etc. like that, and things that are all very, very good. And those have to have some place that in the evolutionary setup you have to come in and find out the ways in which you can integrate those kind of things. You know, they'll all kind of get integrated in a way in which the new capabilities are there, and they have to be lived. And it doesn't work to have something sitting off that's all by itself, and you have to go learn about that whole environment and just work within it, and then what do you do? So next week we're going to have an example of that. We have a young man named Ted Nelson that's coming, and he will just, you know, he's just full of it for many years about all the kind of things, and you have to have faith that somehow that stuff could get integrated into the rest of the world. But it's just really stimulating. And then there are quite a few others that pop up that we'd really like to sort of get on a list about how do you start integrating the kind of proposed new ways of thinking and working that some of them offer. So we just have to do something like that for evolution, and the kind of standards world that John Bozak has fostered is very, very important to sort of try to be consistent with that and such, so that what you do can be more generalized. And I think we're just about out of time, if somebody could tell me. But anyway, this is the second time I've brought us about 12 slides along. I was going to show you about this potential way of working, that there isn't time because I spend too much time on this. But I really want to go through this kind of, get in the basic sort of pictures and discuss them with you, so I appreciated that a lot. So I think we're going to have to close now, and it didn't go quite as planned, but I think it was useful. And thank you, gentlemen, for giving your special talks. And maybe you'll come along with us for the session 3, or the part 3 of this, as we go and make talk. Neil, do you have us?
The week after we finish, I would like to invite those of you who are interested to come Thursday the 9th, it would be a March, to CSLI, which is at the other end of the street. And
That's the last week. That's the last week, is the 9th. So if you want
the last week of the colloquium, the week after the last week of the colloquium. Did I get out by 1 week? Okay, the following week. Anyway, if anyone is interested, we are wanting to implement a lot of Doug's ideas for a knowledge repository on disability and aging related technologies. We've got some of the infrastructure donated already, and it could be a non-threatening place to try to implement the ideas where business can look on, and when they see that it works, decide, oh yeah, we should have picked it up and supported it earlier. But my feeling all along when I've been to bootstrap meetings is that business keeps saying, well, we don't want to let on what we're doing. And so it's been really difficult for Doug to get support, and I've been trying to think, well, we have a non-threatening place that we could try some of the ideas and demonstrate it, and yet a place where everything we do is going to be extremely valuable to many, many people. Anyway, I'd like to explore that, and so I just wanted to warn you, if you are interested, we'll meet at CSLI and give you information on how to get there, and we'll show you a little bit of what we're doing, and then have a discussion about how we could possibly use that as a framework to build on, to demonstrate what Doug's trying to...
So we'll be there, and this is being broadcast so other people can be welcome. And I should point out, as I did several weeks ago, that that he developed a gadget which would sort of simulate or emulate to the interface of a computer how a cursor movement and button pushing and clicking and stuff can do, that can be driven by signals that can come from any kind of a human interface. And just immediately saying that's what we need for some high performance capability exploration too. So, all right, this is the closure of another session, and we'll see you at part 3.